are friendships in hip hop that everybody talks about. And then there are friendships that were so real, so genuine, so quietly built over years of mutual respect that when one of them died, the other one carried that loss for the rest of his career without ever fully saying it out loud. Biggie Smalls and Jay-Z had that kind of friendship. Not the industry version where two rappers do a song together and call each other brothers at award shows. Not the business version where labels align and publicists arrange photo opportunities. A real one, built block by block, record by record, phone call by phone call, to the point where on the last day of Biggie's life, one of the people he picked up the phone and called was Jay-Z. And now, for the first time, someone who was actually there, someone who was in those sessions, in those rooms, on those trips, inside that circle from the very beginning, is sitting down and telling the full story of what that friendship actually looked like from the inside. What he reveals changes the way you hear Brooklyn's finest. It changes the way you think about Jay-Z's career after 1997. And it puts a weight on that last phone call that is almost impossible to sit with once you understand what these two men were actually building together before everything stopped.
Once Big started to hear him and heard that Dead President song, Big was a fan from there, and you know, kind of reached out to him. He knew who Big was, respected Big craft, and they got super tight from there to where like they was real genuine, you know, genuine homies. He was showing love to Big and Big was showing love to him. You know what I mean? Calling, we going to hang out. You see Big was in the Ain't No video. You know, Big wasn't on that song, but we flew out to Miami to go out there so Big just could do that, you know, that appearance in the video. So, and just from that point on, they support each other. You see them rocking at the Palladium together, you know what I'm saying? Rocking at, you know, we had a club called The Ark back in the days where Rock Medeni used to always be doing his parties and shows at. So, you know, they both respected each other lyrically, you know, bar-wise, and, you know, now you know why they were super tight.
That right there is the origin story. And it starts exactly the way the best friendships start, with one person hearing something that stops them in their tracks and makes them say, I need to know who this is. Dead Presidents, 1996. Jay-Z drops that record, and something in it catches Biggie's ear in a way that most records do not. Now understand the context of that moment. By 1996, Biggie Smalls is already who he is. Ready to Die is out. He is not a fan in the traditional sense anymore. He is one of the biggest names in rap. When Biggie says your record is hard, that means something different than when a regular person says it. And what specifically caught him? The bars, the wordplay, the way Jay was putting sentences together. The insider remembers a specific line, take a piece off my kneecap, and says, Biggie heard that and immediately said, yeah, boy is talking. That is the highest compliment Biggie could give. Not this is a hit record, not this is going to sell. Talking, meaning the craft is real, the pen is real. This person belongs in the same conversation I belong in. From that moment, Biggie reached out. And what is important about how this connection formed is that it was not mediated by labels or managers or industry politics. It was built around Clark Kent, a mutual connection who moved in both their circles and around the simple fact that they were both from Brooklyn. Two kids from the same borough who had both found their way into rap through the same kinds of streets and the same kinds of hunger and the same kinds of ambition. That Brooklyn connection mattered more than people understand. It was not just a tagline or something to rap about. It was a shared reference point. When Biggie said he from the town too, that meant something specific. That meant shared experience before the music, shared understanding of what it took to get from where they came from to where they were going. And from that first genuine connection, it grew fast.
Excited about that shit, like, oh, shit, they're about to do a joint together. Like, this shit about to be crazy. So, you know, we were just letting them work, and it kind of for like a few hours, they both just sat in different corners. You know, like really like, yo, we not even friends right now. You know what I mean? Sitting down on surreal, like, let me go over here and get my shit tight. And Big is in one corner getting his shit tight. And there, one of them got pens and papers in hand. You know what I mean? Really just like, yo, I know this nigga ain't gonna play on this shit. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, Hov was the same way too. Like, I know Big ain't gonna play on this. But that's why that shit turned out to be the song it was. You know what I mean? And they know it was gonna be like that. And then kind of like, you see how the song was. they would collaborate on a few lines and have a little few things jotted down so they could kind of just like blend it, put it together, and you know, they made one of the biggest records, you know what I'm saying, especially for, you know, for the town, for Brooklyn, you know what I mean?
Brooklyn's Finest is a classic. That is not an opinion. That is documented hip-hop history. But what actually happened inside that recording session is something that has never been fully told from the perspective of someone who was physically in the room when it went down. And the picture the insider paints is not what most people would expect. There was no back and forth battle energy, no competitive tension where they were trying to outdo each other in real time. What actually happened was both of them retreated to separate corners of the room and went silent. Biggie in one corner with his pen and paper, Jay in the other corner with his pen and paper, and everyone else in the room, the homies, the crew, the people who had come through to be part of this moment, they all just stepped back and let them work. Hours, like that. Both of them alone with their thoughts, alone with their pads, locked in. And the insider explains exactly why both of them approached it that way. Because they both knew what the other one was capable of. Biggie knew Jay was not going to come to this session with anything less than his absolute best. And Jay knew the same thing about Biggie. So neither one of them was willing to show up with anything less than everything they had. They were not competing against each other. They were competing against the standard that the other person's presence demanded.
Yeah, that was like that kind of session, just regular, bunch of Cristal and that motherfucker. You know, Jay don't smoke, you know what I mean? And we were just like, you know, we had that shit flooded with bud and just everybody just in there vibing with each other, just letting them work.
That detail about Jay not smoking is small, but it tells you something. Because in that era, in those sessions, in those rooms, everyone smoked. It was just part of the culture. And Jay sitting in that corner, completely sober, completely locked in, while the room was full and the energy was high, that is someone who understood that this record required everything he had. He was not there to hang out. He was there to make something that would last. And they did. Brooklyn's Finest became exactly what both of them knew it would be when they were sitting in those corners getting their verses right. A record that still sounds like both of them at their peak. A record that still sounds like Brooklyn. A record that still sounds like two people who had so much more to do together and ran out of time before they could do it.
Yeah, I remember Jay saying that Big wanted him to move to Atlanta with him.
Big was talking about it because that was like a big plan. You know, once shit started to rise and some success started to come from, you know.
This is a detail that Jay-Z has mentioned in interviews over the years, but that never fully landed with the weight it deserves. Because when you hear it from someone who was there, someone who heard Biggie talking about this plan in real time, not in retrospect, it becomes something different. Biggie was thinking about the future, actively, specifically, ambitiously. He already had the title for his third album. Born Again was locked in before a single song was recorded for it. Ready to Die, Life After Death, Born Again. He had the trilogy mapped out in his head. He was thinking about where he was going to live, who he was going to bring with him, what the next chapter of his life and his career was going to look like. And Jay-Z was part of that plan. Not in a vague way, not in an industry way where you say, we should do something together sometime. In a specific, personal, come get a crib next to me way. Biggie was telling Jay, when I move, I want you right there. Let's be in the same city. Let's build something together outside of the music too. Let's make this a real partnership.
Dealing with Hov in that type of manner of like, yo, whatever I'm trying to do, I want you to be right there. So it was just them we chop it up, just throwing things out there like, yo, bro, when I move to Miami, like, or when I move to Atlanta, come on, man, go get a crib next to me and let's just go out there, just get shit done and just, rock with each other. That was big expectations. You know what I mean? He was very ambitious about, creating things and doing things. You know what I mean?
Talking about doing another song. That is two people talking about building a life together, about being in each other's corners beyond the studio, beyond the industry, beyond what either of them had already accomplished. Think about what hip-hop looks like if that actually happens. Think about the records that get made. Think about the businesses that get built. Think about the Brooklyn legacy that gets created when the two biggest names from that borough are operating out of the same city, feeding off each other's energy, pushing each other to go further than either one of them would go alone. That future existed in Biggie's mind. He was already picturing it. He was already inviting Jay into it. And then March 9th, 1997 happened, and all of it stopped.
Yeah, I was looking at an old interview by Jay, and he told a story about how the same day that Big got killed, Big called him.
Yeah, I'm sure Big spoke to him. I don't remember, and I wasn't like, probably like sitting right there at the moment, but it's definitely believable because him and Big really, they kicked it like that. Back in them days, the phones wasn't like, technology wasn't like it was today though, but that was somebody he was in conversation with and in cahoots with, like just checking on each other. Like they really, was building the friendship. You know what I'm saying? Like that was really his boy, and we fuck with Hove, and we fuck with the whole team. Like all they was, they was kind of like, homies like us. You know what I'm saying? From the block, out there, was doing their thing before rap, and
Sit with that for a second. On the day Biggie Smalls was killed, one of the people he called was Jay-Z. Jay has spoken about this in interviews. And now, the insider who was part of that circle is confirming it and contextualizing it in a way that makes it even heavier. Because this was not an unusual call. This was not Biggie reaching out because something was wrong or because he had a premonition or because the night felt different. This was just what their friendship looked like. Regular check-ins, regular conversations, real friendship that expressed itself through picking up the phone and seeing how your boy was doing. That is what makes it so impossible to process. There was nothing special about that call in the moment it happened. It was just two friends talking, the way they had talked before, the way they had planned to keep talking, the way in Biggie's mind they were going to talk for decades as they built out the future he had been describing to the people around him. And then, a few hours later, Biggie was gone. Jay-Z has carried that. You can hear it in his music if you know where to listen. You can feel it in the weight with which he has always spoken about Biggie, not as a legend he admired from a distance, but as someone he genuinely lost, someone whose absence left a specific hole that nothing else filled. The insider says something in this conversation that is quietly devastating. He says back in those days, the phones were not like they are today, meaning there is no saved voicemail, no text thread to scroll back through, no digital record of that last conversation. Whatever Biggie said on that last call to Jay, it exists only in Jay-Z's memory now. Nobody else will ever know what was said, what was planned, what version of the future was still being discussed in those final hours.
Sessions, man, like I think about it now and you look and go like it was just some regular shit, but me as a youngster, to me it was a lot regular for me because I've been already getting my feet wet running around with Big for years, and Jay was more like one of us. So after a while you be around somebody so long, he just become like, yo, he one of us, bro. You know what I mean? But you was always excited every time they got together because you just you knew what was gonna come from it. You know what I mean? Anytime B.I. set with the locks, you know what I'm saying, or he'll sit with the Mason, you already know. All right, some special shit gonna come from this because you just know. I know what my boy was bringing to the table, and you know when you're dealing with somebody that's dope and that you respect as well, you know what's gonna be there. So
the insider is describing something here that goes beyond music. He is describing what it felt like to be around Biggie and Jay-Z together as a lived experience. The anticipation of it, the certainty that when these two people were in the same room, something important was going to happen. Not because they were performing, not because they were trying, but because that is what happened naturally when their energies combined. That is what Jay-Z lost in 1997. Not just a collaborator, not just someone to do records with. The person whose presence raised his game in a specific way that nobody else's presence raised it. The person who understood what he was building from Brooklyn because he was building the same thing from the same place. The person who had already invited him into a future that they were going to create together.
I'll say this though, if I'm being honest, on the last day, even though Jada and Styles P, they usually have the best verses as a group, I'll say on the last day, Big, he had the best verse, and I'll say Sheik Luch, he had the second best verse, if I'm being honest, yo.
You took the words to my mouth. I'm about to say, what's beef to you? 3 niggas with hoodies and bats? That ain't shit compared to one small cat with gats. Like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people be sleeping on, a lot of people who sleep on Luch, you know what I'm saying?
And this is the part that hits hardest, because the insider is talking about the last day session, another record, another room, another moment of watching these people create. And he is saying Biggie was on a different kind of time. Not just good, not just the best in the room, on a different level, moving at a frequency that was already beyond what most people in rap were doing. And he was only going to get better. He was already planning Born Again. He was already thinking about what came after life after death. He was mid-stride when everything stopped, not at the end of something, at the beginning of what was supposed to be the next chapter. Jay-Z went on to build one of the greatest careers in the history of music. Every album, every business, everything he created after 1997, he built it without the person who was supposed to be right there next to him doing it. That is not a small thing. That is a weight that sits underneath everything. Biggie called Jay-Z on the last day of his life, not because something was wrong, because that is what their friendship looked like. Regular, real, the kind that does not need a reason to pick up the phone. They had plans, specific ones. Move to Atlanta, get cribs next to each other, keep building, keep recording, create something together that went beyond one song or one album or one era of hip-hop. None of it happened, but it almost did. And the person sitting in that podcast chair remembering it all these years later, someone who was in the room for Brooklyn's finest, who watched both of them retreat to their separate corners and come out with something that still sounds like the best of both of them. That person understands better than anyone what was lost. Not just a rapper, not just an icon, a friend, a collaborator, a future. The phone call on the last day was not supposed to be the last one. It was just Tuesday. It was just checking in. It was just two people from Brooklyn who had found each other in the middle of everything and decided they wanted to keep going together. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think Brooklyn's finest would have sounded like if Biggie and Jay had made a full album together. Tell me what hip-hop looks like if that Atlanta plan actually happened. Because I genuinely think about that. And I think anyone who loves real hip-hop thinks about it too. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, the kind that come from people who were actually there. Because those are the only stories worth telling.